Hi, I'm Arlen Geyer. I would like to talk about the histogram, the very useful but often misunderstood tool that is available in digital single lens reflex cameras, in Adobe Lightroom, and in Adobe Photoshop, along with many other places. The histogram, this little thing right up here in the upper right corner of my Lightroom display, is showing you the relative amounts of different tones in the image. Let's convert this to monochrome to make it easier to understand what's happening. So here's just a very um, low contrast image of just a brick sidewalk. And you can see that the histogram spikes in the center. It has practically, well, it has nothing at all on the lower end or nothing at all on the higher end. This represents the left side is black, the right side is white, with the relative values in between. So what this is telling you is that there's a whole lot in this image that is pretty much middle gray. And there's nothing that's black and there's nothing that's white. There's a little tiny bit trickling down here toward darker gray, and there's a tiny bit trickling up here toward lighter gray. But the bulk of this image is just in the middle. Now if we go back to the color display on here, what this is showing us is a little bit more sophisticated. It's showing the same information but divided into the three additive primary colors of red, green, and blue. So those three colors in light produce white together. But anyway, so what this is showing, so it's not important to think in terms of the three colors. If your camera has a histogram, it may have two different modes of that histogram, one to show the RGB, red, green, blue information, and one to show the luminance, or just the gray values. So often when it shows the RGB values, it does so as three separate histograms. Now, personally, I find that to be more information than I am willing to cope with in the situation, so I prefer the luminance display, which is a simple histogram, which looks much more like this one does in black and white. That's what a camera's histogram, luminance histogram, would look like. And but I'm going to leave this in color so you can see the color images. But just forget the fact that it's got three different colors, and we're just interested. Mostly what we're interested in is the two extremes: what's on this end and what's on this end. And so I want to show you a couple of different possibilities here. So we have the same general scene, but someone's starting to walk into it. And so you can see you have the same middle grays here. And there's a little bit of a spike down in the lower end here where this darker value is here. Notice also that we've got something trickling up toward the white values because there are some cigarette butts in here that are relatively bright. So then the person walks a little further in. Actually, the person's walking out, but anyway, we're going backwards. And you can see that there's more in the darker areas because there's more darker values in here. So now we can look at something that, here's a scene that is very contrasty. So you can see that the white areas go right off the edge of the histogram. You can see it's building up on the right side, and it's piling up on the left side, although it's not quite going off. In fact, actually, it is very slightly, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But so this is a more contrasty scene, and the histogram is reflecting that by having more values in the higher end and more values in the lower end. And a too contrasty scene would be one that pushes off the ends. For example, this one does in the highlight value. It does not in the shadow value. It's just tapering down right at the bottom end there. So what good is this? Well, in your camera, Most cameras, the histogram is an after-the-fact display. If you have live view, your camera may have a live histogram where you can actually dial in the exposure that you want in your live view. Some cameras have that capability and some don't. But if you don't have the live view option, it's an after-the-fact reporting of what the values are in that image. And so if you had, for example, this image, you took this picture, you could see very clearly from the histogram that this is overexposed, that the information is all piled up on the right side, and there's a huge buildup right at the edge, with going straight up the edge there, indicating that there's a lot that's blown out white in this image. And of course, you can see it on the display here. It also shows you that the histogram also shows you that there's nothing in the dark areas, indicating again that the image is overexposed. So knowing that, you can then adjust the exposure. You can use your exposure compensation, knock it down by a stop or so, and shoot again and take a look at the histogram on that one. The histogram is a more reliable reporting of the values in your scene or in your image than your LCD display is of the image itself. If you pay attention in the histogram to the right and left side of it, it will tell you pretty accurately whether the exposure information that you're looking for is in your image. So in your camera, you can use the histogram to reshoot in order to correct a bad exposure. In Lightroom, you can use the histogram to correct a bad exposure. So let's see what we can do with this one. If I go to the Develop module, which I'm in at the moment, I can adjust the exposure to pull this down some. And what I want to do here is, let's see if I come down all the way. Well, actually, before I do that, let me show you in the histogram in Lightroom, up in the top right corner, there's a little tab that allows you to see what is blown out white. And if I click on it, it'll stay like that. And you also have one on the left side that indicates blown out blacks. So those are values that would not print. They will not. There's no texture in them. Nothing. Just pure white or pure black. And so this is showing that all of this has that. Incidentally, many cameras have a similar type of function that's called highlight alert. At least in Canon cameras, it's called highlight alert. And what that'll do is blink black on a blown. It'll kind of look like this, except it'll be black instead of red. It'll do that to indicate a blown out area. So anyway, back to Lightroom. What I want to do now is drop the exposure, and I can, in order to get most of the blown out gone, I have to really darken this. So I'm not even going to try to do that. What I want to do is just adjust the exposure to make her skin tones look about as good as I can get them. And then I can use the histogram to say, well, gee, I've got most of those whites in there, but I still have nothing in the darks. So in Lightroom, you want to adjust your black to get your black area just before it starts to clip. So my little black thing has lit up there, indicating I've clipped there, gone off the edge. So I want to get to just before that, and I'm going to turn off these now because they're distracting me. And the exposure is looking pretty good there. Now, the only other adjustment I would be inclined to make here would be perhaps to increase the saturation just a wee bit. Not a whole lot. And there we go. Now it's looking not too bad. Of course, we realize that we still have some blown out whites. There's nothing we can do about that because they are just too overexposed to recover. So that's that image. Let's take a look at this image of my cat. Actually, he's not my cat. He just eats here and sleeps here. But that's the way cats are. So what this histogram is showing us, this is a nice image, and it's the exposure looks not too bad. But what the histogram is telling us is that there's nothing that's white in this image. So let's see if we just kick up the exposure a little bit, look at the histogram, and just get it so that the white area in the histogram, I'm not even looking at the image, I'm looking at the histogram until this gets up really close to the white edge, not over it, but just close to it. And when I do that, it makes the image a whole lot better. Now, when you increase contrast, which is what this is doing, you also increase saturation. So in this case, I want to back off my saturation just a little bit to bring that back down to looking more normal. So there, that's very, very little bit. So that looks better there. So back to this image. This is what this looked like with a camera, the meter indicated exposure. But let's see what's happening with these highlights. If I drop my exposure down, and you can see that highlight is just going to stay blown out no matter what. So we'll bring that back to about 0 or thereabouts. I can put in a 0 right there to make it exactly. And I also shot this, realizing that this was overexposed in the camera. I also shot it at -1 EV, or exposure compensation of -1. And that came out like this. And you can see here that if I bring down the exposure, there is detail in there, but I don't want it to be that dark. So I have to bring it back up to have these midtones where I want them. And recovery is a function in Lightroom that can bring back some highlight values, but it also grays them out. And so sometimes it works nicely, and sometimes it just sort of reduces the luminance of your highlights. So in this case, I don't really like what it's doing. So I'm going to show you really quickly another possibility, which is the adjustment tool. So with the adjustment tool, I can tell it I want to adjust my exposure, and then I'm going to paint in the area that I want to make that exposure adjustment. I'm adjusting the size of the brush with a bracket key. And I can just paint right in here. And let's see what my size, and just want to paint in a little bit more in here to bring in a little bit more texture there. And I can adjust the exposure of this and some more in there, and that's good. And I'm going to say finish by clicking on the adjustment brush again, and there you go. So the histogram tells you, in this case, it's showing me that I have some that's over, some that's under. This is a very high contrast scene, and I can check up here to see what's under, and you can see the blue areas that are lit up along here, and they really don't bother me at all. Those are not areas that I really care about having detail in. And now there are very few areas left that are blown out white, and I could work more with the adjustment brush if I wanted to pull those in. So there you go. That's what the histogram does for you, and that's what Lightroom will do for you. Thanks. Bye.